There was once a plant that could be found in nearly every village garden, growing quietly along fences, beside barns, and near the homes of ordinary families. Today, most people walk right past it without giving it a second glance. It isn't rare, exotic, or difficult to grow. In fact, it remains remarkably common in many places. Yet for hundreds of years, this humble plant was considered one of the most respected and powerful species a household could keep close at hand. That plant was tansy. Long before modern medicine, pharmaceutical companies, and laboratory-produced treatments became part of everyday life, people depended on the plants growing around them. Survival often relied on local knowledge passed down from one generation to the next. Among those trusted plants, tansy occupied a unique position. It wasn't treasured because it was pleasant or gentle. It earned its reputation because it was effective, powerful, and sometimes capable of causing harm if used incorrectly. Unlike many wild plants that appeared naturally around homes, tansy was often planted deliberately. People made room for it in their gardens because they believed it served an important purpose. It could commonly be found near cottages, along property boundaries, beside animal shelters, and within monastery gardens throughout Europe. Farmers knew it well. Herbal practitioners understood its qualities. Families respected it. Everyone seemed to recognize one important truth. Tansy was useful, but it demanded caution. At first glance, the plant hardly appears intimidating. Its bright yellow flowers resemble tiny golden buttons clustered together at the tops of sturdy stems. During summer, those blooms can make the plant appear cheerful and decorative. Yet anyone who brushed against tansy quickly noticed something distinctive. Its scent was powerful, sharp, bitter, and intensely aromatic. It was not the sweet fragrance associated with flowers grown for beauty. Instead, it carried a medicinal quality that immediately stood out. Interestingly, many insects seemed unwilling to approach it. Animals often avoided grazing on it as well. Long before anyone understood the chemical compounds responsible for those reactions, people observed them repeatedly and drew their own conclusions. In traditional herbal culture, tansy was never treated casually. It wasn't the kind of herb people drank daily for comfort or relaxation. It was not viewed as a gentle remedy suitable for frequent use. Instead, it was employed sparingly for specific purposes and only according to established traditions. People rarely experimented with tansy. They followed methods that had been taught and repeated over generations. Historically, one of tansy's most important roles involved cleansing and protection. Not the modern concept of wellness cleanses or health trends, but practical forms of protection that mattered greatly in a world where parasites, insects, and infestations were common realities. Homes faced these challenges. Livestock faced them. People themselves faced them. Tansy became one of the tools used to address those problems. Bundles of the plant were commonly hung inside homes. Fresh leaves were rubbed onto door frames, windowsills, bedding, and storage areas. Dried stems and flowers were placed among grain supplies and clothing. Families observed that insects seemed reluctant to remain where tansy was present. These practices continued because people repeatedly witnessed the same results. Its reputation extended beyond the household and into farming communities. Farmers viewed tansy with both appreciation and caution. They understood that the plant possessed a strong influence and therefore required careful handling. Knowledgeable users emphasized moderation. Too little might accomplish nothing. Too much could create problems. Because of this, its use was often restricted to specific times and carefully measured situations. What made tansy particularly fascinating was that people recognized its strength long before modern science explained why it worked. They didn't know the names of the chemical compounds inside the plant. They had no laboratories to analyze its structure. Yet through observation and experience, they understood something important. This was not a plant intended for constant use. It served a purpose, accomplished its task, and was then set aside. That pattern separated it from many milder herbs commonly found in traditional gardens. As centuries passed, society changed. Modern medicine expanded. Agriculture became industrialized. Scientific research increasingly replaced traditional practices. Gradually, tansy faded from everyday conversations. This wasn't necessarily because it stopped being useful. Rather, it became difficult to fit into systems that valued consistency, standardization, and predictable outcomes. One challenge was that tansy does not always behave identically. Its potency can vary depending on climate, soil conditions, weather patterns, and even the stage of growth at which it is harvested. Modern industries prefer products that deliver identical results every time. Tansy, like many traditional herbs, does not always cooperate with that expectation. Ironically, the very qualities that made it valuable within traditional cultures made it difficult to standardize for modern use. Another reason tansy became less familiar is the way people began comparing traditional plants directly with modern pharmaceuticals. Such comparisons often miss an important point. Traditional remedies existed within an entirely different worldview. People were not asking whether one treatment was scientifically superior to another. Instead, they focused on practical outcomes. The question was simple: does this help solve the problem we are facing right now? For many generations, tansy provided an answer to that question in certain situations. Its use was limited, specific, and governed by experience. But it remained respected because people believed it served a meaningful purpose. Safety concerns also contributed to its decline in popularity. Historical herbalists consistently warned about proper use. They emphasized that tansy was not appropriate for everyone. It was not recommended for children. It was generally avoided during pregnancy. It was never intended for prolonged or excessive use. Understanding these restrictions formed a crucial part of traditional knowledge. As fewer people learned those details, the plant's reputation began to change. Instead of being viewed as a powerful herb requiring careful handling, it was increasingly described simply as dangerous. Once that label becomes attached to a plant, many people stop discussing it altogether, rather than taking the time to explain its complexities. Yet history tells a more nuanced story. In countless historical records, tansy appears alongside herbs that remain well known and respected today. It was not some obscure secret known only to specialists. It was widely recognized throughout many regions. What distinguished it was the caution that accompanied its use. Modern life has also removed many of the conditions that originally made tansy valuable. Improved sanitation, regulated food systems, modern veterinary care, and better housing have dramatically reduced many of the challenges people once faced daily. As those challenges disappeared, some of the tools used to address them gradually faded into the background as well. But tansy itself never disappeared. The plant remains remarkably hardy. It grows vigorously in poor soil where many other plants struggle. It tolerates cold winters, hot summers, drought, and neglect. It resists many common pests and diseases. In some places, it spreads so successfully that gardeners must actively manage its growth. Today, people who cultivate tansy often do so for entirely different reasons. Some appreciate it as a historical garden plant. Others use it in companion planting systems. Many value its ability to discourage certain insects from lingering nearby. And when they grow it, they often notice the same patterns that earlier generations observed centuries ago. Insects frequently avoid it. Animals often leave it alone. Certain nearby plants seem to experience fewer pest problems. These observations continue to spark curiosity among modern gardeners, just as they did among their ancestors. What truly made tansy important was never magic, superstition, or mystery. Its value came from generations of careful observation. Families, farmers, and healers repeatedly noticed the same characteristics. They learned where it was useful, where it wasn't, and when caution was necessary. That balance is perhaps the most important lesson tansy offers today. Traditional knowledge rarely treated powerful plants casually. Respect and restraint were considered just as important as effectiveness. People understood that usefulness and risk could exist together within the same plant. Modern society sometimes struggles with that idea. There is often a tendency to categorize things as entirely good or entirely bad. Tansy refuses to fit neatly into either category. It reminds us that some of nature's most powerful tools require understanding, experience, and responsibility. So why has tansy largely disappeared from popular conversation? The answer may be simpler than many people expect, because it is a plant that cannot be reduced to easy headlines or simple explanations. It requires context, it demands respect, and it challenges the idea that every useful thing must also be completely harmless. In a world increasingly focused on convenience and simplicity, tansy remains something more complicated. Yet for those who study historical gardens, traditional herbal practices, and the survival knowledge of earlier generations, it still holds a quiet place of importance. Not because it is miraculous, not because it is mysterious, but because it represents a kind of practical wisdom that once helped people navigate a far more difficult world. And perhaps that is why tansy continues to fascinate those who encounter it today. It serves as a reminder that many of the plants growing around us carry stories far older than we realize. Stories of caution, experience, survival, and knowledge accumulated over centuries. Sometimes, the plants we have nearly forgotten are the very ones that reveal just how much our ancestors understood about the natural world around them. 2. Wormwood. If tansy was known for its sudden strength and demanding nature, wormwood earned its reputation in a very different way. Rather than acting quickly and forcefully, wormwood became valued for its steady and gradual presence. It was a plant associated with patience, routine, and long-standing traditions, rather than short bursts of intense use. For centuries, wormwood became almost synonymous with bitterness itself. Its flavor was so distinctive that people often used the plant as a comparison whenever they wanted to describe something exceptionally bitter. Even in places where few people still used wormwood regularly, its name remained connected to that powerful taste. Unlike tansy, which was often approached with extreme caution and used only in specific situations, wormwood was commonly incorporated into broader herbal traditions. It was rarely relied upon by itself. Instead, it was frequently blended with other plants, carefully balanced, and adjusted according to local customs and experience. Small amounts, repeated use, and careful observation formed the foundation of its traditional role. This flexibility helped wormwood spread throughout many cultures and regions. From rural villages to monastery gardens, the plant became deeply woven into traditional practices. Monastic communities cultivated it with discipline and purpose, while in the countryside it was often gathered from wild populations and preserved for future use. Traders carried dried wormwood along commercial routes, allowing knowledge of the plant to travel across countries and generations. While tansy often appeared briefly and intensely within traditional practices, wormwood remained present for much longer periods. Its role was built around continuity rather than urgency. As organized medical systems gradually developed, this characteristic worked in wormwood's favor. Plants that could be measured, repeated, adjusted, and documented were easier to incorporate into structured approaches. Their effects could be observed over time, and their use could be refined through experience. Wormwood fit naturally into this process. Traditional healers seemed to appreciate this quality. They viewed wormwood as a plant that allowed room for adjustment and learning. If a preparation needed modification, it could be altered gradually. If observations suggested a different approach, changes could be made over time. Tansy offered far less flexibility. Because of this difference, wormwood was often considered a starting point rather than a final solution. Not because it lacked strength, but because it provided a gentler path that allowed observation and adaptation. Within many traditional systems, that adaptability itself was viewed as a form of safety. Wormwood was not seen as the end of a process. It was often regarded as the beginning. 3. Black walnut. Black walnut gained its reputation through observation rather than folklore alone. People noticed its effects immediately whenever they handled the plant. The green outer hulls surrounding the nuts left dark stains on skin, clothing, baskets, and tools. Those marks could remain visible for long periods, making a lasting impression on anyone who worked with the tree. Nothing about black walnut seemed subtle. It announced its presence clearly and left evidence behind. Over time, those visible stains took on symbolic meaning. Many people reasoned that if a plant could leave such a strong mark on wood, fabric, and skin, then it must possess equally significant properties in other areas as well. Whether that belief was scientific or not mattered less than the repeated observations that shaped traditional thinking. Compared to the immediate reputation of tansy, black walnut was viewed differently. Its influence was often associated with patience and persistence. Rather than acting suddenly, it seemed to work gradually. If tansy resembled a flash of lightning that appeared and disappeared quickly, black walnut was more like flowing water, slow, steady, and constantly shaping its surroundings over time. This perception influenced how people approached it. Many traditions valued black walnut precisely because it did not appear to work too quickly. Its gradual nature gave people time to observe changes and respond accordingly. Others, however, treated it with caution for the same reason. Anything that lingered carried a certain uncertainty, and prolonged effects often inspired both respect and hesitation. Black walnut was not viewed as a plant for casual use. It demanded commitment. Once introduced into traditional practices, it was often regarded as something that left a lasting presence. Unlike wormwood, which could be adjusted, reduced, or discontinued relatively easily, black walnut carried a reputation for persistence. Its effects, both real and symbolic, seemed to remain long after the initial use. That persistence became one of the reasons it earned such respect. At the same time, it was also why many approached it carefully. The contrast between tansy and black walnut reveals an important principle that appeared repeatedly in traditional herbal knowledge. Strength was not measured solely by how intense something felt in the moment. Duration mattered just as much. A violent storm may arrive suddenly and command immediate attention. Yet a river slowly carving through rock can transform an entire landscape over the course of years. Both possess power. One announces itself loudly and disappears. The other works quietly, steadily, and often leaves a far greater mark in the long run. 4. Garlic. At first glance, garlic seems almost too ordinary to belong on a list of historically significant healing plants. It lacks the striking appearance of some herbs and carries none of the mystery that surrounds more powerful traditional remedies. Yet its simplicity is precisely what made it so important throughout history. While plants like tansy often occupied specific corners of gardens and wormwood held a specialized role within herbal traditions, garlic became part of everyday life. It moved effortlessly between different purposes. It was food, it was seasoning, it was protection, it was tradition, it was medicine. In many cultures, it even carried symbolic and spiritual significance. What made garlic remarkable was not dramatic power, but constant presence. People used it daily. It appeared in kitchens year after year, season after season. Families planted it without hesitation and harvested it as naturally as any other staple crop. Unlike plants that required careful instructions, a small action repeated every day can shape outcomes more profoundly than a powerful action used only occasionally. Garlic embodied that philosophy perfectly. It did not demand special attention. It rarely inspired caution. It did not establish strict boundaries between use and misuse. Instead, it simply became part of life. Perhaps that is one reason garlic remained so deeply rooted in human culture, while many other traditional plants gradually faded from common use. Tansy required knowledge, discipline, and restraint. Garlic rewarded familiarity and routine. When modern people compare traditional herbs to contemporary solutions, they often overlook these differences in purpose. Tansy was never intended to be used constantly. Wormwood required careful observation and respect. Black walnut involved patience and long-term commitment. Garlic asked for something much simpler. It asked to be present. And through that steady presence, it quietly influenced generations. Both garlic and tansy earned respect within traditional systems, but they represented completely different approaches. One relied on decisive action when needed. The other worked gradually through repetition and habit. That distinction helps explain why garlic remained a permanent resident in kitchens around the world, while many other traditional plants slowly disappeared from everyday life. 5. Rue. Among the many plants associated with traditional herbal knowledge, rue may have shared the closest philosophical relationship with tansy. Not because the two plants were identical, but because both inspired a similar attitude of caution and respect. Rue was rarely viewed as an ordinary garden plant. From the moment it was planted, it carried a sense of purpose. People did not grow it simply because it looked attractive or produced abundant harvests. Its value seemed connected to something deeper. It occupied a symbolic space within traditional gardens that extended beyond practical usefulness. Historically, rue was often planted near entrances, borders, gates, and pathways. It frequently appeared in places that marked transitions between one area and another. In a symbolic sense, it served as a reminder of awareness and observation. Where tansy established boundaries through action, rue established them through attention. Many traditions associated rue with heightened perception. Not merely physical sight, but a broader awareness of changes, patterns, and imbalances. It was believed to encourage observation and reflection. In certain cultures, rue appeared in rituals, important decisions, and periods of transition. Its purpose was not necessarily to create change, but to help people recognize when change was already occurring. This distinction separated it clearly from Tansy. Tansy often entered the picture after a problem had become obvious. Rue existed earlier in the process. Symbolically speaking, Rue suggested that something deserved attention. Tansy suggested that action was required. This difference shaped how the two plants were understood within traditional systems. They were rarely treated as interchangeable. In fact, knowledgeable gardeners and healers often recognized that combining powerful influences without careful thought could create unnecessary risks. To them, wisdom did not come from accumulating strength. It came from knowing where each strength belonged. Rue had its role, Tansy had its role. Even their growth habits seemed to reflect these contrasting philosophies. Rue grows slowly and deliberately. Over time, it develops a sturdy, woody structure and remains largely where it is planted. It does not rush to occupy new territory. Instead, it encourages intentional interaction and patient observation. Tansy behaves very differently. It spreads with enthusiasm, expands rapidly, and quickly fills available space. It seems driven by movement rather than restraint. For traditional gardeners, these growth patterns carried meaning. Plants were not viewed merely as isolated species. Their behavior, placement, and relationships with surrounding plants all contributed to how they were understood. This perspective is less common today. Modern discussions often examine plants individually, focusing on specific characteristics while ignoring the broader context in which they were traditionally used. Historically, however, meaning emerged from relationships. A plant's significance depended not only on what it was, but also where it grew, what surrounded it, and how it interacted with the world around it. From that viewpoint, Rue and Tansy were never true opposites. Instead, they functioned like guardians, stationed at different points along the same threshold. One encouraged awareness before the boundary was crossed. The other responded after it had been crossed. Together, they reflected a deeper understanding that traditional cultures often embraced. That wisdom begins with observation, but sometimes observation alone is no longer enough.